Welcome back, everybody, to Cinema Daily US for another episode of New York versus New York, or Queens versus Manhattan, because I'm Matthew Shuckman here in Queens.
I'm Ed Douglas, and I'm down in Lower East Side of Manhattan.
And today we're talking about MaXXXine, the third installment in the Ty West Mia Goth horror trilogy, if we would call it, because they are connected. And all right, I'm gonna start this off, which is very rare for me, because I saw X. Fine. Didn't dislike it, didn't really care. And I hadn't seen Pearl.
Oh,
Just never was. I watched it, of course, before seeing Maxine, and I'm like, I don't know how he's gonna top this after after watching
oh
Pearl.
wow.
Um, but and Maxine ultimately is not a horrible movie, but I think it's filled with a lot of strange just ins and outs that don't really match up. I think it's got a lot of, not necessarily holes, but it's got a lot of issues on my side for it, which include things like, of course, like everything Ty West does in a lot of ways is an homage, but this one is trying to do too much. Like there are scenes that are very much trying to be like De Palma in the '80s when he was trying to rip off Hitchcock with like Body Double and Dress to Kill, and even going to the '90s with Raising Cain. And there are only certain parts of it, and then they don't appear in other parts. And there's a lot of weird callbacks to things that I don't think match out very well. Like I have to look it back up. Maybe I'm wrong, but at one point, Halsey's character I think references the Black Dahlia murder, referencing as the murderer being called the Black Dahlia, but it was actually Elizabeth Short herself who was the Black Dahlia, not the murderer. So there's a lot
Right.
of weird references that don't like, they seem to like know what they're talking about, but they don't.
Yeah. I loved X. Actually, one of my favorite movies that year. Pearl, I was not as into, but then I watched it again fairly recently. Actually, I watched both those again. Pearl, to be honest, you don't even need to really watch Pearl to
No,
enjoy
of course not.
Maxine. Maxine's kind of a direct follow-up to X because literally it follows that character. It references things from that movie and from her life. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's things that I loved. The Body Double references. I love Body Double. Like as soon as they started playing Frankie Goes to Hollywood, I'm like, oh yeah, he's trying to do Body Double. There's a really obvious things like that,
Yeah.
and there's things that I really like that. Uh, my biggest problem, and I don't want to spoil anything, but my biggest problem is when it gets to the end, and we kind of learn. This whole movie is like it's talking about this serial killer who's like plaguing Hollywood, the Night Stalker, and then at the very end, it feels like it tries to tie it into Maxine's story,
Well,
and that's where I really felt like, well, it didn't really work. It kind of didn't even make much sense, and it was kind of like, well, why did you even bother with that?
Well,
Long run.
they do try and mention that the murders that Maxine is tied into is a copycat. They don't think it's the Night Stalker. So there is
Sure.
a layout that's not supposed to be at the ultimate end. However, though, there is a part of me that felt like, oh, this is trying to be a little bit more like a Scream type thing where I'm trying to figure out the murderer. And as soon as let that go, it, it became obvious even before the reveal of who it was. I
Right.
think it became fairly obvious what was going on. But that's the other like that's the thing. Like there's so much going on that doesn't seem to mesh well. It's like it's overly comedic purposely in a certain sense, but Bobby Cannavale and Michelle Monaghan's cop characters just so it feels such like awkward jigsaw pieces that don't really fit in, but they seem to be connected somehow, that don't really they don't seem to be part of the puzzle, but they were forced to be. Or like again, going back to all of his references, like it feels strange where it's like, I like that you can do all those things, but then a lot of it fails because it's like then it feels like he has to show it to people. Like and there's a scene early on where you see somebody about to be, part of a ritual murder, and you see a guy with a video camera and he's knocking on a big green door. And I'm like, oh, cool, behind the green door, nice
Mm.
job. And then 2 minutes later, they show you somebody watching behind the green door, just like, oh, just in case you didn't realize it. Or, like the Buster Keaton joke at the beginning is great. I don't know how many younger audiences may get that kind of thing.
Mm.
But in doing all of that, it just seems like it was too caught up in trying to be referential and not enough in trying to tie itself to its own self.
But I really like Bobby Monahan and Michelle. Michelle Monahan and Bobby Cannavale. And in fact, I made a comment that I would love to see a cop show, like a serial cop show of them in the '80s. I would love to see that, like an '80s. That would be amazing, like HBO Max series
But
where they go around in LA and Hollywood. That in '80s would be amazing.
that's my issue. It's like Michelle Monaghan's character felt like she was like the miscast version of CSI Los Angeles Law and Order or something, you know? It's just like it didn't fit very well for me. I'm not saying that the characters weren't funny in a certain
Mm.
sense, but they don't seem to fit into this film.
Yeah, you gotta talk about Kevin Bacon, because Kevin Bacon's character, he's kind of a private detective, and he is so sleazy that he fits so well into the whole thing, and he becomes like this other antagonist that's kind of plaguing Maxine the whole way movie through. And I thought he was great. And I thought he was. If I ever pick like one thing I really just loved about the movie, I picked Kevin Bacon's character over everything else.
It's funny you say that because there's I not the character itself, but I do have slight issues with that too because when you first see him, he is literally like as if he's the coach driver for Jack the Ripper in like From Hell or something like that, where he's like, I don't want to be a part of this. I can't do all these nasty things. Then all of a sudden, he's even nastier than
Mhm.
maybe that character. So it didn't again a big seesaw mismatch in the character. However, I think somebody I didn't know was in the movie and whose character in the real world would not be as nice as he was. But I
Hmm.
love Giancarlo Esposito's character in this movie, and I love the fact that they let him do certain. I'm again without trying to ruin it, end up in a certain place that you wouldn't think that character would end up in.
Yeah, I was actually bummed I didn't get to do interviews for this, because I would have asked Giancarlo and Kevin Bacon about Hollywood in the '80s. I mean, Giancarlo is more of a New York guy, really, but I mean, they both worked in Hollywood in the
Yeah,
'80s, and I was really curious whether or not they thought Ty got it right or not. Because I mean, Kevin Bacon was right there. That was his height of his, when he was breaking out. So
well, that's again my other weird complaint about the film. You know, because there's all these '80s references, and early on, she asked her video store clerk friend, name 5 actresses who started off in horror and then became big stars. And the list he makes, it's like because it's 1985, and like one of the names he lists off is Demi Moore, and like Demi Moore was not a massive star in 1985. It just like none of it seemed to like it was like a bunch of references that seemed to be trying to be that Kevin
mm.
Williams script like nature that didn't really fit for me.
I can't remember.
um
Did he mention Kevin Bacon in that list by any
no, because
chance?
it's only female, so no, Kevin
Oh,
Bacon
it was
didn't
only
get
women.
mentioned.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was just saying, because Kevin Bacon would have been in that fun for Friday the 13th. He was there too. But I guess, yeah.
So what would you say your final score would be?
I'd probably give this a B. I mean, I didn't like it as much as either X or Pearl. I think it actually is okay conclusion. I mean, the thing is, you have a trilogy. We have 3 movies that feel completely different from each other. I mean, that's a pretty big achievement. I don't know if I'd ever like sit down and watch all 3 in one sitting. But I mean, I do think. I mean, I'm gonna go see it again on Friday. I got, because of A24, my membership, I got a free ticket. I'm like, I'll go to the Alamo, see it again. So maybe I like it more second time. I was mixed, but I mean, a B is pretty, for me, it's, pretty
Yeah,
middle ground.
I definitely go B minus. And to leave off with a more positive note on referential stuff that's in the film, like they have Maxine walking over the Hollywood star for Theda Bara, who was an actual person, does have an actual star in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but it's the callback to the alligator from the 2
Oh,
films whose
sure.
name was Theda. And it was a nice way of doing it because I guess he couldn't have the alligator in this one. So what do? Have her step on
Yeah.
the Hollywood
Well,
star.
they do show a movie. They do show a scene from a movie called, I think it's called The Great Alligator. I can't remember what it's called, but
Yeah,
there's one of those movies that shows a gator in there as well. But also, I gotta say, I have a soft spot in my heart for the Psycho house on the Universal lot. I have a picture of myself from the '90s there, and so whenever I see that in a movie or a show, it's like, oh, I love that place.
yeah.
So
But yeah, overall B minus for me. And it's always lovely talking to you.
likewise, yeah, it's great.
Till next time, thank you for joining us here on Cinema Daily US.